So I'll just kind of start from scratch so we can go through the whole process and you can see all of the nuances involved. So we're going to deploy a new token. So I'll just call it Fueki token FT. And then document type, we're going to go with equity, since in this case we'll be tokenizing the equity of the SPV. Total supply is, the total amount of tokens that we're trying to mint. So again, for this example, I'm just going to mint 1 million tokens. Minimum time lock amount. So basically, in this case, this would be it's when the transfer lock or transfer restrictions basically start applying. So it enforces vesting and holding periods. So you could basically, in this case, I'm just going to put it at 1 just so I can show you the functionality of the token. But in the tokenization that we're going to be doing for Umeko, this will be set to 30 days, and then it'll basically be vesting schedules of every 30 days. So we'll be able to vest it that way. Max release delay is not really relevant in this case. It's just the latest sort of boundary for when a token vesting schedule could basically be enacted. And then the original value. So this is just for reference on chain, but we use a pretty comprehensive system of nav to actually feed real-time data and value evaluation to the token. So for this case, again, I'm just gonna, for the example, it's just gonna be 1 million. Okay. And then, so this is where you can upload the documents. So in the case of Umeko, this will be the NI 43101. So I'm just going to use an example doc for right now. So, this is on testnet, so this is not a real tokenization. This is just showing you the functionality. It creates an on-chain document hash of the document so it can be actually verified and checked. And then that is minted within the token on the network this is deployed on. So just, before you submit the token to basically the banker, who then reviews this and then approves it, here are all the relevant details. So this is the nav oracle that I was talking about, where basically it's a separate contract that is provisioned to someone who basically can, do the nav valuation and make sure that all of the reporting of the mine, of the price of gold, of any relevant sort of metrics that would be important in terms of the valuation of these tokens. They're basically nominated as someone that can update that contract, and then that contract's data is fed into this security token. So it allows, just up to the minute basically pricing and valuation for the assets. So a quick compliance check for these tokens. So they are transfer restricted. So basically the transfer rules are enforced at the contract level. There's, role assignments. So I'll get to that after we deploy this, and you can see how we configure wallet admins, transfer admins, different admins that are responsible for basically managing the token supply once it's alive. And there's a whitelist policy. So because these are securities, you have to have anyone that's holding one of these tokens has to be KYC'd, has to be, accredited investor. They basically need to go through verification in order to be added to a specific list so that they can hold and interact and trade these tokens. Okay, cool. So I'll submit. And again, this is on testnet, so I'm able to just approve this quickly just for demonstration purposes. So 1 moment. Cool. Okay, so now I've approved it. So now we can deploy the token. Cool. So now we have our token address. So this is the actual address of the security token. And then this is the transfer rule address, which has all of the specific transfer restrictions that are related to this particular token. The nav oracle has not been set up yet, but we'll get to that as we configure this. And this is the transaction hash of the actual deployment of the security tokens. So we go into the security token center. So here is basically a dashboard that allows you to kind of, at a global view, see all of the related functions and sections that are involved with this. It's pretty comprehensive. So this is kind of the home page of the security token dashboard. So we have the current supply, all the token details, the name, symbol, decimals, all of that fun stuff. We have the ability to globally pause or freeze the token supply. So this would stop all trading or any kind of transfers or any movement of the tokens until it's been unpaused. And so here are the roles, like I was mentioning. So initially, when you deployed the when you deployed the token initially, the contract admin and reserve admin, those two are the deployer of the initial contracts for the token. So that's, I guess, that's basically just default. And then so for the wallet admin, they are, how would I explain that? Okay, so the reserve admin is able to mint and burn new assets if there's a requirement for that. A scenario where you would theoretically burn one of these tokens would be hypothetically if someone were to get hacked or these tokens were to fall into someone's hands that is not permitted to hold them. Like again, in a scenario where you lose your phone or access to your wallet, someone gets access to that's not accredited or has not been KYC'd, we could burn those tokens that have been lost and then mint you new ones so that they're not in the hands of someone not cleared or able to actually legally hold these tokens. So that's the reserve admin's role. The contract admin is basically just responsible for kind of the management of the token supply. So basically they can, pause the token, which prevents all trading. They can create snapshots, which is relevant for dividend distribution, and they can upgrade the transfer rule contract, which if there's a reason, like say some new guidance from the SEC that requires some new, function or some new restrictions on how tokens can be transferred or traded or whatever it may be, the contract admin would be responsible for going in and actually upgrading the contracts that govern this specific token. And then, so then the transfer admin, that's who basically configures the investors. So we'll get to that as we kind of continue going through this dashboard, but basically they are the ones that are whitelisting the wallets that have been KYC'd and have been approved to be able to interact with these tokens. And they manage, basically investor onboarding and just general management of the investor pools and groupings on chain. And then the last one would be the transfer admin. And then this would be someone who is, configuring the vesting schedules, the token lockups, and basically allowing the facilitation of transfers on behalf of other investors if there is a requirement for that. Again, the scenario I typically comes back to is when tokens fall into the hands of someone that they're not supposed to be in. The transfer admin can unilaterally take tokens from one address and bring them back to the original owner's address. Because these are securities, so that's a requirement of being able to claw back these assets if they get into the wrong hands. So those are the admins, and it's pretty straightforward. So when you want to nominate a new admin, you'd basically just get the wallet address of the user that you want to be that role of that admin, and then you essentially just choose which one it is, and then grant the role. you also can revoke the role if there's a reason to, no longer have someone acting in that particular role for whatever reason. Cool. And so this is a contract admin's section in kind of responsibilities. It's the ability to pause the token supply like we saw in the last page, and then create a snapshot, which basically is taking a particular block, so kind of like it's a time marker of the blockchain at a particular block height, which basically is like on April 3rd at 9:30, these are the investors that currently are holding these tokens. This is how many tokens these investors had at that specific point, so that dividends can be distributed accordingly. And so the snapshot actually creates that logging of basically, who's holding how many tokens and basically which investors are holding how many tokens and what dividends need to be distributed to them. So this is the investor section. So basically, right now, obviously, we just deployed it, so it's empty. But once this gets filled with the investors that are holding these tokens, you actually have like a registry where you can see, by wallet address, which investors are included in this, approved sort of list to be able to interact with these tokens. You have, when you're actually creating the transfer groups. So how I configured this from a contract level is basically you assign an investor to a particular group ID so that I have a whole matrix where basically group 1 can transfer to group 1 or group 2, and group 2 can transfer to group 3, but group 3 can't transfer to group 4, or however the matrix is depending on the registration exemption that we're using. If it's like Reg D, Reg CF, Reg S, that's all relevant in terms of assigning a investor to a particular transfer group, because that's what basically determines what transfer restrictions are placed on their tokens. You can set a maximum balance for a particular address. So if you want to have a certain cap on how many tokens a investor is allowed to get in total, you can configure that right here. You can freeze or unfreeze specific investor addresses. So again, it's really the scenario of someone gets hacked or loses access to their wallet. We can freeze that particular wallet, and then if they regain, access to it, I wouldn't recommend using the same wallet if it's already been compromised, but just hypothetically, we're able to freeze that wallet so that no transfers can happen, outside from that wallet with these tokens. And then if for whatever reason we wanted to unfreeze it, we could do that just to move the tokens out of that wallet. But at least for damage control and sort of, exploits and things of that nature, we have the sort of required compliance abilities to claw back tokens that have been wrongfully taken or lost. And this is a really useful sort of transfer check function where basically you could check two addresses and see if they would be able to transfer with one another. And that's dependent on, lockup schedules, what investor sort of grouping or classification they have, if they're accredited, non-accredited, US or non-US. These things all sort of matter in terms of if two addresses can actually interact or trade with one another. So you can check that right here without having to pay gas or actually perform a transaction on chain. And then just for kind of convenience, you're able to do batch onboarding. So say you have 100 investors that you already know that you're going to have for this particular token deployment. You can upload a CSV or just do it manually with the form and upload as many of these entries as you'd like, and then just process them in a batch. So that's pretty straightforward for managing that. So now token vesting. There are no schedules obviously right now because we just deployed this, but you would create release schedules. So in this scenario for Umeko, this would be every 30 days. We would be essentially releasing or vesting a certain percent of the token supply depending on trading mechanisms and whatever else we're doing. This is basically where you configure that and set the time parameters and delay until the first release happens, and then how many subsequent releases are going to essentially happen from that point. And you can also view all of your existing schedules right here. And then when you create one of these release or vesting schedules, you obviously need to fund the vesting schedule with the tokens that are going to be distributed through once those vesting timeframes have been met. So you basically would, this is sort of the second step after you create the schedule, then you need to fund the schedule. And so you obviously have the recipient for that specific vesting schedule, put the amount of tokens when it's starting, and then you create basically like a schedule ID so that this can be indexed and really easily viewed and sort of managed. And then the cancelable by address is basically someone that is nominated or allowed to cancel a specific vesting schedule. And this is relevant if, for whatever reason, an investor is no longer involved in this, or it has sold their share or interest or whatever. You can have someone that can cancel a vesting schedule and extract the tokens from that vesting schedule. Otherwise, they would basically just be given to that investor at the maturity time. So it's really important to have someone that you can nominate that can go in and, for whatever reason, cancel a schedule and recollect the tokens that were put into that schedule. So that's essentially what the cancelable by address is. And then there's another just, convenience batch fund where you can create multiple time locks in one transaction to save on gas, since each of these are actions that actually get written to the blockchain. So it's relevant to be able to batch them together to save on, just the overhead of doing it. So dividends, okay. So here is where basically you can manage snapshots, which I mentioned earlier. Snapshots, again, is just taking a moment in time and sort of taking a picture of the ledger at that specific moment so that you can see the accounting of how many tokens are held by, which investors, and then, distribute dividends accordingly to, their, proportion of the tokens that they're holding. So yeah, you would basically fund a particular distribution. So if we're going to be, distributing X percent of tokens on this given time, you would fund that, and then pick which snapshot ID that is, that funding is for, and then you would basically fund that, that dividend, which will be distributed at a later time. There's, analytics where you can see who's been distributed what, how many remaining tokens there are, and a pretty simple sort of claim function where anyone that is been, has been included in a dividend distribution, it's on them to basically come onto the platform and claim the dividends. They're not automatically distributed to each of these individuals. It's kind of a tax situation where we don't want to, assume that someone wants to claim dividends and basically force a taxable event on them. So it's really up to them to decide that they want to claim those dividends, and they don't expire. So it's just really up to them when they want to, pay the gas fee to basically claim their dividends. So that's the claim dividends section right here. So swaps, this gets a bit more complicated. I'll kind of keep this pretty high level for right now. I can go into more detail about this is like the OTC sort of swap functionality, but there's also the orbital AMM, which I can go into much more detail because it's exponentially more complicated. But so basically this is allowing for bilateral OTC trading within the investor sort of investor groupings that we have. So basically a seller is able to escrow their security tokens for a specific buyer and quote a token where a buyer can post a specific buy configuration for a specific seller. So these need to be between two parties that know each other and have been approved and whitelisted for this specific token. So it allows for like peer-to-peer trading with securities, which is pretty novel and doesn't really exist. But I've created a system of smart contracts that facilitate this specific counterparty OTC type trading. So yeah, the pricing basically is benchmarked against the current NAV, and the quote asset needs to be a stable coin. So if you're swapping, this security token for a, USDC or USDT equivalent, it has to be the other token that's not the security token that you're basically trading for more security tokens, or you're selling your security token, has to be a dollar pegged stable coin. So USDT, USDC, or USDC, etc. So that's basically the swap function here. It's pretty standard, straightforward. Valuation. So this is the net asset value, the NAV, sort of on-chain valuation and attestation history for this token. So once you deploy this token, I will basically go in and then deploy the NAV oracle address. And basically the oracle is just a means of feeding, like current data to this smart contract that is this security. So the NAV oracle basically is what's going to be feeding the current price of gold, the current valuation of the assets that are involved in this specific tokenization, so that the pricing of this asset is constantly, live, fresh, and has not gone stale by, just sitting for too long without being updated with the market, essentially. So this would be something that I would configure and basically deploy the specific NAV oracle for this deployment, and then I would put in that contract address right here, and then register that oracle so that the data is flowing to this contract on a cadence that basically is pre-configured. So that's NAV compliance. So this is what I was talking about earlier with the investor groupings and classifications. You can check again, between two addresses if a certain amount of a transaction would actually succeed or would it fail, depending on what group they're in, what restrictions are, applied to them, and how many tokens they may have access to, or, whatever you may need. It's just to, again, avoid having to waste money on transactions, because even failed transactions do cost gas. So you're going to be paying money to not have something actually happen. So it's kind of just convenience. So here is the transfer sort of restriction matrix. Again, this is what I was trying to sort of explain earlier. It's basically saying, this group can never trade with this group, and, there's different sort of configurations and different restrictions that apply depending on what type of tokenization this is. Right now, this hasn't been configured, so it's just saying no one can trade with anyone, because as of right now, there are no unlocked tokens, given we just deployed this, so it takes a certain amount of time for tokens to start vesting and unlocking, so that these will then start, turning green with which parties can trade with which. Okay, cool. So that's the compliance, analytics. So once you actually get sort of, moving and tokens start vesting and trading and, accruing interest and all of that, you basically would get, some usable data here that would show, like pending dividends, the volume of swaps, certain time lock summaries, how many tokens are locked, vested, unlocked, things of that nature. And then you get a holder distribution by investment, like the investor grouping or classification. So like I was mentioning in the last section. And then you have just, your own particular portfolio of how many tokens you have that are basically free or, locked, unlocked, etc. And then if you had any claimable dividends, you would basically be claiming them here. And if you had any pre-configured or active swaps, that again would be here. So yeah, that is pretty much the security token management and configuration part of this application. And then again, on the main sort of dashboard, you'd be able to see, your portfolio performance, how many trades, how many active orders, how many assets, any recent transactions or mints or activities. Yeah, so that would be the security token section of this.